Maliek Blade.
This week's guest is
poet and musician Mark J. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. I'm blessed to be alive and enjoying the work that God continues to do in my life.
That's good to hear. So I have Mark here. We've connected on social media a couple of years back. And since then, I've had the opportunity to hear some of his poems, which are great. He's also a worship leader. But specifically, what stood out to me the most was his very candid conversation and dialogue about pornography addiction. Now, I know this oftentimes is something that we avoid talking about. In general, sex lives and things of that nature are private, and we don't want to talk about it. We want to keep it hidden. But oftentimes, I've found that things that we keep hidden tend to be the things that can overwhelm us and control us. And specifically, I understand that pornography is, as I've said before, indirectly or directly involved in a lot of our lives. And by that, I mean, if you aren't experiencing dabbling with it or being fully addicted, there's typically someone in and around your proximity or your nuclear family who is. So I think it's important to start a conversation around it so that it's not, the secrecy doesn't hold anyone hostage. And Mark definitely demonstrates talking openly about it. So that we're going to have a pretty much very, very raw, in-depth discussion today about something that I think is very real and want to break the stigma of silence around it. So just to start us off, Mark, could you, one, tell us how you were exposed to pornography, and then kind of catch everyone up to why you began writing and speaking about it publicly?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was first exposed to pornography. I remember when I was about 12 years old, and I got this brand new computer because I was homeschooled, so I had to do my homeschool work on that computer, and having that access to the internet for the first time, of course, I got curious. Nobody was around. It was just me and the computer. I was home alone, and I just started typing a few words from sex to naked women or whatever words I could think of, and I just was exposed to all kinds of images, photos and videos, and these are things I had never seen before in my life. I was just 12 years old. No one talked to me about how human sexuality works or how babies come to be. No one really had that talk with me yet. And so that was how I was introduced to human sexuality, was through pornography. And that first exposure, it just stuck, it like was ingrained in my brain. And I kept hiding it. I kept covering it up. But over time, as we know, the internet began to spread, and the ways that we could access information and media is it's way more accessible now than it ever was. So of course smartphones came out and everything, and it became an addiction over time that I could not stay away from, and I didn't know how to be free for a very long time. So yeah, it started just in my living room, and just with an internet connection and HP desktop when those monitors were huge, and that was the beginning of a long journey of struggling with sexual addiction for me.
And what marked the moment where you began attempting to break the addiction, and how were you able to do so? Yeah.
So we fast forward, of course, from 12 years old all the way up to I was about 29, which I'm 33 years old now. So it's not super long ago, but a few years ago. My addiction had progressed over time. It started off with pornography, but then I would get curious about other avenues of experiencing that release. So I would try out different things, like I would try phone chat lines. I would browse through Instagram images. I would look up videos even just on YouTube, and of course pornography sites, whatever I could go to get that high. But as long as I could keep it a secret, that was what was important for me, because I didn't want to be humiliated. I didn't want anybody to find out. I didn't want anybody to know, because I was a Christian dude, and I love Jesus, and I went to church, did the ministry stuff, preached, led worship, performed on stage, did all that good stuff. So as long as it could be kept secret, I would just go for it. I didn't think of any consequences. I couldn't see beyond that moment. I couldn't think of, oh my goodness, how is this going to affect my wife? How is it going to affect my family? How is it going to affect me in the long run? I didn't think about those things. All I could think about when that moment and that urge came was the pleasure I was going to experience just for that moment. So over time, that progressed. And at 29 years old, I made the decision that I was going to file for divorce. And I already had 2 daughters with my wife. We were married for about 5 years at that point. And I told myself, I can't change. I'm just going to keep hurting her. I'm getting worse to the point where I'm not even satisfied with just porn anymore, where I'm being tempted to seek out other women, and where I'm being tempted to seek out more serious acts, I guess, sexual acts, you could say, real life, not just a video or images anymore. So at that point, I decided I was going to file for divorce for my wife, and thinking that maybe this will just solve things, and maybe some point down the road, I'll be fine, and I'll somehow recover. I had no idea. I had no plan, of course, for recovery or healing, because I didn't know that one existed. And I remember during that period of being separated, it was about 3 months I was separated from my wife, and I thought that there was no hope. There was no way I could break this habit I struggled with for so many years, because I thought I had tried everything. But during that time, of course, God intervenes, and he brings people into my life. He brings a couple of brothers that I felt like I could trust, that I felt like I could just talk to, have an honest, real conversation with. And I didn't know what that was like. I didn't know what it was like to just be honest about me, to just tell somebody I'm struggling with this sin, especially not sexual sin, because I grew up and nobody talked about it at church. People kind of danced around it from the pulpit. They talked about lust and said, flee youthful lust and all that, but there was no strategy. There was no practical tools to defeat an addiction to pornography or sexual addiction. So I decided I was going to give up. I was ready to file for divorce. I was about to write divorce papers. And then when I start to get connected with these brothers who I was able to be honest with, that was life-changing for me, because I didn't know what it was like to have a conversation like that. I didn't know what it was like to just be real face-to-face with another human being. I didn't know what it was like to, like the scripture says, confess your sins. And when I encountered that feeling of freedom in confession and in being honest and being transparent about my struggles in that moment, something just lifted off me, and I felt like I wasn't alone anymore. I felt like I was missing out on the power of just being real, of just being honest, and like the scripture says, of just confessing. And when I tasted that in that moment, I was like, man, maybe there is hope. Maybe I'm really not alone. But I didn't know that feeling of not being alone until I was able to admit, to speak, to actually admit vocally to somebody else in real life my struggle. Mm-hmm. So from there, there was a lot of steps that I acquired, new tools that I learned to apply to my life, and they're just basic things. Like, of course, the thing about confession, that's been huge in my life, and it's still part of my life to this day. A lot of guys, I think, they wait till they've fallen into sexual sin, and maybe they might confess it to somebody if they work up the courage. But what I've learned that's been so helpful for me is confessing right when you feel any temptation. If there's a thought that comes to you, deal with it right there. Talk to somebody, in the moment, right there. Don't hesitate. And that's still effective for me, because sometimes thoughts still come to me from my past, and I'm like, and sometimes those old emotions will come back on, that feeling that feeling that I had to look at pornography, or that high that I got from flirting with someone else. And that'll come back. And in that moment, I have to stop and either pause before God and say, God, what do I really need? Because there's obviously a real need in me that needs to be met. What is it? Or I'll reach out to a brother and say, hey man, these are thoughts that are coming to me right now, and I don't like them. And I don't want to be that person again. And just that moment of just being honest and real, it kind of refreshes my focus, and the temptation kind of just dissolves. And for me, that's been huge. There's other steps too. Another one that I've learned to do is, I touched on it just a little bit, is ask God what the real need is. Because a lot of times I, and on experiences that I've heard from other guys and people, is we try to just modify our behavior, and we try to just change the external. Like, if I just put enough filters on my devices, put a filter here, give somebody a password, and if I don't have access to it, I'll be good. I'll be sober from pornography, from sexual addiction, which that's cool. And I think I have a filter on my browser, but those are good things. Those are good precautions to have, but it's not dealing with the root of the issue, which there's always something deeper that we may be subconsciously searching for. And what it was for me is I craved the feeling of being affirmed, a feeling of being wanted, the feeling of being desired, and something about pursuing sexual activity, sexual sin for me, something about it made me feel like I could just be myself in a sense, even though it was false. In that moment, I felt like I didn't have to worry about what anyone thought of me. I could just be Mark. But it was a lie, of course, because it leaves you empty every single time. But that was the root for me, was affirmation, acceptance, feeling loved, just being able to be real, being able to be myself. Because I was a super shy dude to myself most of the time, pretty private person, even though I was involved in church and knew how to worship and tell people about the gospel. But deep inside, I didn't know how just to open up to anyone, and I didn't know that was necessary for my freedom and for my healing. So there's so many other steps, and I'm trying to think about what else I should share, but there's a lot. I'm actually working on writing, eventually, slowly writing a book that hopefully can cover all that God has done in me over the past just 3.5 years or so.
Right. Yeah, no, thank you for what you have shared up until this point. I think you definitely could go on and on, because it goes so far beyond just watching. It's very pervasive in other aspects of life. So I know you could go on for a while. So you mentioned quite a few different things that I do want to hit on, specifically the family dynamic and marriage. But just going back, and then we'll work our way back to the family, because some of the questions that have been sent in are related to family. But I'm going to work my way back to having an understanding of what you're even being exposed to, just individually, and then we can get toward like its effects on others. Because I think about when I was first exposed to porn, I was young, definitely in the single digit ages. And I remember being at my cousin's house, 2 older cousins, and I didn't know what was going on. I knew whatever they were doing, they were sneaking to put something on the TV. So they waited till, the adults weren't around and so on and so forth. And so they put this stuff on the TV. And the thing for me is, at the time, I didn't have words or categories for what I was watching. I didn't know what sex was because I was so young. And I didn't know what was going on. I just knew something bad was happening because I knew they were being sneaky. So I didn't even know what was happening on the screen. And I remember being conflicted because there was this one aspect of, I know something bad is happening. And I was a good kid at that time. So they were a little, more mischievous, and I was the one that would tell every time somebody did something wrong.
Okay.
But in that moment, I saw it, and I knew on one end something wrong is happening, but on the other end there was this curiosity because I had never seen it before. So I think about the damage it does to a child who doesn't even have categories for intimacy or sex or those body parts, just being so young and I would say, I guess, pure in the sense of not even, or just unaware and naive. And how that is what sparked it for me, was being exposed to it then, and then the curiosity of, well, what was that, and what was going on, and having a lot of questions that I didn't get answered. So I bring that up to say, what was the mental process for you when you were exposed to it? Did you already have categories for what was going on? Did you not even know what it was? Did it start like a journey of trying to find out more? How did it affect you at that time, based on your mental growth at that point in time, being, you said 12? Yeah.
I was 12 years old, and I still didn't know anything about sex. Again, nobody had that talk with me. So that was my first time being exposed to really sexuality. The only other thing I was exposed to was like TV scenes where people were making out and stuff. And I used to think, even at that age, when I was already 12 years old, I thought that if people kissed enough, that somehow someone got pregnant from that. I didn't know how the human body worked yet. But when I saw pornography, yeah, I didn't have any real category for it. I didn't know what it meant. So that was like the beginning of me trying to figure out more, like you said. And that just sparked my curiosity even more. So I wanted to find more and look up more and read more about how that works, and more like just see more of it. And then eventually I realized, okay, this is what's happening. Oh, this is how the male and female body work, and this is how babies come to be. And I kind of just figured it out on my own, because when no one's having those conversations, you're not going to want to be the one to start it. I mean, maybe some people are those who will just say what's on their mind, but my house wasn't like that. We didn't just say random questions, or we're always kind of afraid of, man, this sounds dumb, or yeah, we're supposed to stay away from that stuff. So it would be shameful for me to talk about it.
I remember it never became I would say, addiction or compulsive thing for me, but I remember it was very prominent. And I remember questioning myself, like, why isn't this more common? Because I was in a men's group, and literally every week in the men's group, it was talking about porn. Everybody had a story of just addiction, or I messed up this week. And to me, the men's group became frustrating because that's all it was about. And even though that had become a part of my life, it wasn't to the point of addiction. So at that time, I didn't think it was necessary to keep talking about it. And, there was some other aspects to that group to where it became more of a just place to confess, and there wasn't much practicality in next steps. So it was just everyone come be very transparent, which is good. Transparency is good, but there wasn't much else beyond that. And I remember wondering at the time, and I was much younger then, but wondering what the big problem was. So I know that I had that experience when I heard others talking about it in such a kind of demonizing it way. And I wanted to raise this question to you, because you were saying that it was overwhelming you, and it was to the point where you were thinking about divorce. I know that a lot of guys, whether Christian or not, and of course I understand that women partake as well, so it's not just a man thing. Right. But speaking specifically about men, and because that's what I'm most familiar with, it's the idea that I know some may hear this discussion and feel like, what's the big deal? Whether Christian or not Christian, it's just kind of understood that men are sexual beings. We need release one way or the other, whether it be with a partner or through self-stimulation. So I know that some may be thinking, well, what's the big deal? Especially so much so to the point where you were considering divorce. So why is it a quote unquote problem? Why are you not looking at it as just a natural reality of being a man that has hormones and testosterone? Yeah,
it's a problem, and I can speak personally because, first of all, for myself, it took over my life. And this is while me being, I guess, what you would call a good Christian young man. I went to church like all the time. Went to prayer meetings, served in ministry. I was the poster child for Christianity. I was a pastor's kid, but it still took over my life. Like, it run my life, my decisions. I couldn't stop myself. What's really scary is I couldn't even stop myself from pursuing someone who was not my wife. Like, I would find myself randomly messaging women just to see what they would say on Facebook or whatever. And it didn't start off that way. I didn't start off in 12 years old, trying to flirt with a bunch of women. I wasn't messaging random women. I didn't even think of that yet. I was just a kid. But it started with pornography. It started with that first desire. And whether it was me looking at pornography or me going to flirt with other women or whatever, look up images on Instagram or anything, or just porn sites, it was the same rush. I was pursuing the same rush, and you get hooked on that rush. That rush of dopamine through your brain that goes when you pursue lustful sins. Your brain becomes glued to that. And actually, when you look at those images on pornographic images and anything that stimulates you sexually, your brain forms a bond to those images. So it's not like you can just look and then detach right away. When you think you just looked for a moment, really your brain is bonding. It's creating this bond to those images, to those women that you don't even know. So what that caused for me was an inability to really connect with my wife, because I had been bonding to all these random women for so many years. I couldn't even have an intimate conversation with my wife. I didn't even know how to communicate with her. I didn't know how to share how I felt. Even if I was upset, I couldn't even talk about how I felt. I didn't know how to connect. I didn't know how to even just appreciate her for her. And it wasn't anything she was doing wrong. She was great. She's always been awesome, an amazing woman who loves God. And not even that she's not attractive. She's always been attractive to me. But I found myself, even when I was being intimate with my wife, I couldn't stop from thinking of somebody else, imagining somebody else. I was never satisfied with her. And it's because over time, pornography trained my brain to always crave something else. Because usually when you're looking at porn and you're getting curious, you're not happy with just one picture. I mean, it wasn't that way for me. I was looking through photos, hundreds of photos, or several videos, dozens of videos, spending an hour or two at a time, looking through like which one's going to give me that ultimate, climax.
Right. I would add that I think our view of sex in general needs to shift a bit. Of course, coming from a biblical worldview, in the sense that I think sex has become so normalized that the idea of even being a virgin is odd. I have a friend who's gained a profile for a show that she's on, and she's 30-something years old and a virgin. And I remember when that story came out, everyone was just they thought something. The social media comments were, something's wrong with her. What's the problem? That's weird. People were disgusted with the virginity at that age.
Wow.
And I think in the general sense, most times when we think of sexuality, we think of it as something to accumulate a lot of times as men. And even in proposing this, as I say it now, I think some Christians might find this weird. But when we look at what the Bible presents, we're supposed to find a spouse and both go into the marriage clueless about sex, with no reference point of porn or this person I slept with in the past. You're supposed to both go into it ignorant and learn each other's bodies and grow in that together. But that is so foreign in our culture now, to the point where I know when being chaste or not having sex before marriage is ever raised, the question that is always countered is, what if you marry someone who's not good at it? And I know a lot of people partake or indulge in porn for the pleasure of it, but also for the experience. They want to, it's like school almost, trying to get as knowledgeable of all the different things you can do to impress your partner, when in actuality, it's supposed to be a process you grow through together. So the guy shouldn't have a reference point of another woman, and the woman shouldn't have a reference point of another guy. But when you watch porn, you have this unlimited library of reference points. And like you said, they don't just go away. And I've experienced that in the stuff that I've seen. Images from years ago, like as I was telling you the story about what happened when I was probably 9, those images are still in my head. I haven't forgotten.
Yeah.
So those things stick with you, and I think taint what's meant to be something that you grow through together with the person you're with.
Yeah, so true. I think a huge issue is everybody wants options, and they want to know everything about everything before they actually try it, or they want to have experience with everything. Like we have reviews about everything online, and everybody has opinions on everything. So it's like there's this explosion of knowledge with the internet, and blogs have become maybe even more popular than books. I don't know. But it's so easy to just pick up something online and then just go with that, and then get curious about something else, and then you want to look this up, look that up, and then we want to pick. in pornography, you want to pick what you want. You get to pick how they look. You get to pick what they're going to be doing. You know, what kind of act, how old are they, what color are they? It's like there's no innocence anymore because we want to be able to pick everything, which is not the way God designed it to be.
Right. You're not supposed to just build a fantasy and then live that out. So I think we've covered a bit. I want to bring in some of the questions that have been sent in to see if you can speak to some of this. So one is, how do you determine the threshold of addiction? And I guess that's saying, what's the line between just dabbling with it versus being addicted?
Yeah. I think if anything you can't stop doing is an addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Guys say, oh, but I only look once a week or every other week. And then I would ask, okay, can you just stop anytime you want? And then they'll kind of pause. Okay, maybe I have a problem. I think a problem with sin and lust is the lie of the enemy is he gets us to minimize it and say it's not a big deal. And how many years did I do that? It's not a big deal until my sin and my addiction progressed over time. And it was something I thought I could manage. So I think if you can't stop doing it, that it's a problem. And I remember ways that I would justify my sin. Like sometimes I would pull up like these audio porn, and I would justify in my head, okay, I'm not looking at any images, right? So Jesus said, whoever looks at a woman to lust for her. So in my head, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm not looking. It's just audio.
Finding a way out.
Right? Yeah. So figuring out a way to minimize the sin, but it was the same sin. It was the same rush. It was the same lust. Just my eyes weren't involved, but it was still the same fantasy was going on in my head. So I remember ways of justifying it that way, or I would tell myself, I'm just going to do it look at porn a couple times this week. So it's not too bad, but still, it still fed the same habit over time. And I think you have to look back over time, like what kind of pattern has your actions caused you to create? If you look back over the past year or maybe a couple of years, has it created a pattern to where you can't stop doing this? If so, then I would call it an addiction.
Mm-hmm. This one is from a wife. As a wife, what should I do if my husband is addicted to pornography?
Leave him. No, I'm just kidding. That was a joke.
Oh my God.
Sorry.
That's a good break in the monotony. Thank you for
that. No, So first of all, I think the wife needs to know that it's very common, unfortunately, for a husband to be, or a male especially, to be addicted to pornography these days. Not to say it's okay, and not to say you should just accept it, but so you know that you're not alone, that you're a woman who's not alone, that there's likely someone else in your circle of friends or community that understands what you're going through. I would say try to have a conversation with him, but with women and with my wife, I experienced this. The first reaction when you find out your husband's looking at pornography is you get defensive. Like, man, why is he doing that? And you feel like there's something wrong with you, with the way you look, or he's not attracted to you. For me, it had nothing to do with the way my wife looked. And for most guys, that's not it, right? Because he's with you because he was attracted at some point. But it was my own desires. It was my own sin. It was my own habits and not being able to address the root of my struggles. So I would say just have a conversation, but he has to be able to feel safe being honest.
Yeah.
Because if he feels like he's in trouble, he's busted again, he's going to get scared of being honest and try to hide it. I did that for years. I was afraid of being honest because I felt like, oh man, she's going to be upset with me. I don't want to tell her if I messed up. Why am I going to want to tell her I'm struggling? But if you can help create an atmosphere where he feels comfortable being honest, but not in a sense that it's okay that he can just keep being honest over and over. Oh yeah, I messed up again, and like it's no big deal. But that he can go to you for comfort, like you can come alongside him as a partner and say, I don't like what you're doing, but I see you being honest about it and that you want to grow through it and you want to learn. So in that sense, if he had that support where he can be honest and comfortable, being open, that would be huge for him. I think it would help the husband feel like he's not alone. And that's hoping that the husband sees something wrong with those actions and that he knows there's a problem. It's a whole nother story if he doesn't think there's a problem with pornography, which that's unfortunate for even some Christian guys. They don't see it as an issue, unfortunately.
Yeah. So I would even add to that, just kind of knowing some of the nuances of how people think. As you mentioned, I know if a woman is aware of this or she finds out, a lot of times personally, the emotions go toward, am I not good enough? What about me? What's the problem? How am I not meeting your expectations? And it becomes personal. So I would add that it might be helpful for the wife to talk through her personal emotions about it, separate with someone outside of the situation, before having that conversation that you mentioned. Because I could see it becoming a problem if we're trying to deal with his addiction, but then she comes into the conversation kind of venting her frustration of feeling about, well, what about me? Why do you run there instead of me? So it's two separate conversations that need to happen. So I think it might be helpful for her to process through her personal feelings, independent of addressing him. What do you think about couples viewing porn together?
There's another one I've heard of. I think it's just the same as viewing it by yourself. I mean, it's just as bad. I mean, it's still a sin. I think you need to ask yourself, why do you crave more than what God gave you? And to try to get to the root of why do you feel the need to look at pornography together? Because I think God gave us everything we need to enjoy one another if we have a spouse, and that we don't need assistance from something that doesn't please him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think any sin that we go to, we have to try to really examine our hearts. Like, go before God, but also go before people we can trust, mentors, brothers and sisters in Christ who can keep it real with us from a biblical perspective, and ask ourselves, what am I really searching for? And why am I turning to something that obviously is not God honoring to meet it? But if you can get to the root of what it is, of why you're drawn to that specific sin, or if you don't think it's a sin, I just encourage you to look at the Bible. I mean, it talks about sexual immorality, it talks about youthful lusts, it talks about purity, and it talks about the man leaving his home and leaving his parents so he can be one with his wife. I mean, when you're watching pornography together, how is that encouraging the oneness God created marriage to facilitate? Yeah.
I'll just kind of summarize this one. Essentially, if someone, it's a guy, if someone is isolated, they don't have that community you were talking about, and not married, but they do want to address it, where could they start if they don't have brothers around or a spouse?
Yeah. I'm so glad that people ask questions like that. It gets me excited because yes, there's hope. There's hope, and there are resources out there. There's a organization that may be familiar to a lot of people. One is it's called XXXchurch.com. I used to lead one of their online groups. They actually have online groups for men. They have groups for women that you can stream into weekly, and it's private, it's confidential. You could be a part of their monthly groups. You go to XXXchurch.com. That's a good resource to at least get connected with a group. I would personally recommend eventually getting connected with a group in real life, because there's nothing like the face-to-face human connection and interaction that we're meant to have. But that's good to start online, so you have something, you have people to connect with, you have people you're communicating with, you're opening up to. Another ministry that a lot of churches have is Celebrate Recovery, another one that may be familiar. And that's something that's it's in a lot of ministries all over the country. So that's a good ministry to get connected with. A lot of people think it's just for people who have struggled with substance abuse, narcotic abuse, but it's for anyone that has struggled with any bad habit. And they actually have specific groups for guys who have struggled with sexual addiction. So it's a powerful ministry. That's something I'd recommend getting connected to. Also, even just getting connected with a Christian therapist, that's something that has benefited me immensely. I still see one every other week because I feel like there's constantly things to uncover, to work through, and things I'm digging up from my childhood still that I'm addressing and working through. So I would recommend that too. And don't be discouraged if the first therapist you meet didn't seem very helpful, because sometimes you got to connect with different ones to find the one that you're like, okay, this is helping me.
Yeah. I'm going to throw a curveball your way, and this is just something that I thought of. I know that oftentimes when we're in maybe church settings or in group settings, when we're talking about this, it's easy, rather than saying that I'm dealing with porn, it's a lot easier to say, oh, I'm struggling with lust. That's the easy out, to say it that way without dealing with what's going on under that. So a lot of times under lust is viewing pornography, but I've noticed that even in the discussion about pornography, it's just kind of, I'm just struggling with pornography. Like, it's just kind of generalized in the sense of just I'm watching something incessantly without speaking to the fact that oftentimes pornography is coupled with masturbation. It's not just a show that I keep binge watching on Netflix. There's something else going on here. And I've heard some interesting views on masturbation independent of pornography. So what would you say to someone who made the issue specifically is masturbation if there's no pornography involved?
Yeah. That's another way I used to minimize my habit. Was sometimes I would be able to masturbate without looking at any images. And again, it was just in my mind. I was like, just in my head, just the fantasy in my mind, so I can masturbate. I'm not looking at porn, so it's okay. But it's really the same fantasy that's going on in your mind. It's the same rush, it's the same lust, and it feeds the habit, just the same as using pornography with or without it. So I think it's just an excuse. It's a cop out for a lot of people who probably don't know how to stop masturbating. So it's easier to say, oh, I'm not looking at porn, I'm just masturbating, than actually put in some work and effort to address the issue and work through it and realize there's a root to any type of compulsive behavior, to any habit that you can't stop going after. There's a root to it, and it takes work to uncover that. I didn't get it over time. It took me time to uncover the fears that I had from my past, the anger that I had from my past, unforgiveness that was buried in my heart, things I had against family members that I didn't even know I had because I was a kid, that were causing me to pursue compulsive behavior. So I think it's the same sin. And when you're using your hand to pleasure yourself, I think you're causing if it's a future spouse or a present spouse, to miss out on the affection that was made for them and the connection that you two were meant to share together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if there's a situation where someone is interested in, I'm trying to figure out the best way to say it. If they wanted to introduce this topic, for discussion into like a group to open it up, to start the conversation, because oftentimes I don't want to say like every guy has watched or will watch porn, but I understand that it's very widespread. Mm-hmm. So sometimes when you're leading a group, you kind of want to shift the conversation towards something a little deeper than just cliches. So how whether it be in a one-on-one relationship, a friendship, or a group, how does one turn the conversation toward not just this specifically, but deeper things like this that we know are there, that people might not willingly volunteer? How do you shift the conversation there without making it awkward, of course?
Yeah, sure. So I'm imagining like if you're getting together with a group of guys or group of friends, or if you're in your small group or something, you're probably already thinking you're already in a place where people want to grow spiritually, or you all are believers and you believe in biblical morality. So bringing it up in that atmosphere, for me it's easy. It's like natural. I've been part of small groups where nobody talked about their personal issues. I'm like, okay, I know y'all struggle. No one else is talking about it. But a lot of times it'll just be me and my wife, just being open, being transparent. I'd be talking about my past with pornography and sexual addiction, and the room would just be quiet. Right. But after meeting with them several times, and I think maybe they were encouraged by my ability to be open about it, eventually more people started to open up over time. So I would say the best way to approach it is to first be honest about yourself, because when you're honest about your own struggles, it makes everybody feel a little bit more comfortable with you. And I know that because I get on stage all the time and I share transparently and just honestly, and people approach me all the time, sharing that, spilling their guts, once I'm done, and just a lot of times confessing for their first time. So when you're vulnerable with yourself, about yourself with other people, that inspires and encourages that same vulnerability in your circle. So that's a good way to start. But also be patient too, because not everyone is going to open up right away. But they're going to think about it, and it's going to get their attention for sure. Just be patient with that. Eventually, people will start to warm up to that kind of conversation.
Yeah. So I would agree that transparency, just being the one to step out there and be transparent, could spark a fire. I want to bring it back to this, and we can close out here, because I think you want to deal with the root and the heart of things, and it's not necessarily about behavior modification, not just stopping watching porn or stopping masturbating, but dealing with the root. And I know that based on other conversations and how I believe some may understand this, if they listen through, it'll be like, yeah, they're making more of it than what it is. And I think that is a misunderstanding of the depths of what's going on. So I want to unpack this a little bit. You spoke earlier and you said that a part of your addiction was a desire for affirmation, which is getting more at the heart. So could you explain that? Yeah. So I grew up in a Christian home. My mom and dad were pastors. They were always involved in ministry. I knew the Bible front to back. I memorized entire chapters, even as a kid. So I knew all that. So growing up in my home, again, a Christian home, Christian parents, knew about Jesus, loved the Lord. We were all involved in ministry. But when I got a little older, I realized that there wasn't a lot of affirmation in the home. And I later read that book, The 5 Love Languages, and I learned that one of my love languages, one of my primary ways of feeling loved, is when people affirm me with words. So words of affirmation. And when I started to get to the root of my past and my struggles and started to learn to overcome lust, I looked back and realized there wasn't a lot of affirmation in my home. There wasn't a lot of, hey, Mark, you're awesome, man. There wasn't a lot of my parents doing that to me. And that made me feel like an emptiness, but I didn't know it because I was a kid. I didn't know I was missing out on that. But that's something that I needed. I needed to hear those words. I needed to know that I was valuable to them, that I was valuable to someone, but I needed to hear them speak it. So some people are going to feel really valuable when you hug them or when you just hold them, give them a good bear hug. For me, that touch didn't matter that much. But words were like everything. Even to this day, when someone speaks a really sincere, affirming phrase to me or a few sentences, it'll like mean the world. Like I'll be thinking about it for a couple of weeks. And I didn't have that. But for some reason, God designed me to crave that. And I didn't have that affirmation. So it caused me to pursue that sort of feeling of affirmation in other things, which in my case happened to be pornography, happened to be a sexual addiction, that happened to be inappropriate relationships. So I was seeking out the feeling of being valued, of feeling wanted through my sinful desires. But really what I really wanted underneath that, after digging and getting to the root, was I wanted someone just to accept me. I wanted someone to look me in the eyes and tell me that, hey, I'm awesome. Something like that. I wanted to just know I could be myself as somebody, and they wouldn't be upset for it. They would accept me just for me. So that led to my struggle, was not knowing that I could have that affirmation, first of all, from God today, when I feel like I'm not worthy or like I'm not important, because sometimes I feel that way. I stop before God and I say, Lord, what do you think of me? And that's something I never asked him that when I was years. I never even thought of asking him that question. I would read the Bible like it was a textbook, but I didn't internalize it. I didn't feel like it was real to me until this period of healing in my life, of recovery and growth. And now when I ask him what he thinks of me, I hear him speak to me clearly. And he makes me feel that. He makes me feel like I'm strong, like he makes me feel like I'm valuable.
and he speaks it to me directly. So I've been able to fulfill the real need that was underneath the lust issue for so long, because that's the point of lust from the enemy's. The enemy's point of using sin is to bury the real need underneath that sin, because he doesn't want us to get to the root. He doesn't want us to discover the truth.
Mm-hmm. I have a statement in my head that I think summarizes that, but I could be off. And
Okay.
This is something that I believe, but I don't want to project my ideas onto you. So let me know if this is what you were saying. And if it's not, then feel free to redirect. But
Sure.
It seems like, not even just specifically for you, but the idea of seeking affirmation through porn or masturbation. Would you agree with the statement that one who is seeking to be affirmed, approved of, plays out a fantasy where they're sexually intimate with a partner, and this fantasy of pleasing the partner is a way to play out the affirmation that you desire? Or is that way off?
No, that relates to it. Yeah. I mean, yeah, because you're it's almost like you're trying to somehow earn the affection you crave.
Yeah.
When I wanted to not have to earn it. So this is even a new thought you're helping me dig through here, is that pornography even was like a way for me to feel affirmed without having to earn it. Because I always felt like I had to earn, right? Because maybe being a pastor's kid, I had to act a certain way, or I had to be at another level above everybody else spiritually. So I felt like I had to kind of work, to be affirmed. But with pornography, it was like, oh, I don't have to work. I can just be, and I'm good, which was a lie, but.
And I gather that from just observations of even people who may not have dated or been active at all. I know a lot of virgins who are on porn very hard. And a lot of times it comes from, I know guys that have been rejected by women, so their escape is porn, because they create scenarios where they are being affirmed. So it pretty much is getting the affirmation without the word, and it also appeases something that you were lacking elsewhere. So
right, yeah.
And partaking in porn isn't just commonly for the people who are active or promiscuous. It's oftentimes for a mental stimulation of the person. So it's just as common amongst people who may have never dated or may have never had sex before, because it's about you creating something that makes you feel good on your terms, when you want it, how you want it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's so true.
Well, I think we've covered a lot. I appreciate your transparency with all this. For those that may be interested in learning more about who you are, your poetry, and your music, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me. My website is markjthepoet.com. You can also find me on Facebook or Instagram as Mark J. the Poet.
All right. Once again, thank you, Mark, and please continue doing what you're doing and having this conversation. I think it's needed. And sooner or later, I think it'll become cool to talk about, these things that may be holding us hostage in private. So hopefully it catches on.
Definitely. Thanks a lot, Malik.
No problem. Thank you. This is Maliek Blade, and that was Guest 2.